This is the second.
Go ahead.
This is the Siches Chelik Yud Ches, the second Siche for Parshas Baaloscho. I just want to start off by saying that this is a very, very long Siche, so we're not going to learn the whole Siche. We're going to learn Chelik of the beginning and the Chelik of the end, and the middle, which is a whole section for itself. We will have to leave for everyone to learn by themselves because it's kedai to learn it. It makes it much more interesting, but it's going to take a very long time. So we're going to learn the beginning, a few pages in the beginning of the Siche, a few pages at the end, and it has a hemshech. It's going to flow, but in the middle there's going to be a whole section that is a section for itself. Okay, this week's Parsha Baaloscho talks about the Korban Pesach. It means that when the Eden were in Mitzrayim before they left, they had to bring the Korban Pesach, and then they went out to Mitzrayim. The year later, Nisan, they were in the Midbar. They put up the Mishkan, and then the Eibishter told them that they should bring the Korban Pesach that year also on Pesach, on Erev Pesach. So we have two Korban Pesachs. We have the Korban Pesach called Pesach Mitzrayim, the one that was done in Mitzrayim before they left. And then the Korban Pesach of the next year in the Midbar, when they already had the Mishkan, and that's called the Pesach Midbar, the Pesach, the Korban Pesach they brought in the Midbar. So the Rebbe says like this, for the Chilukim zwischen dem Korban Pesach, was man gebracht in Mitzrayim, und dem Korban Pesach, was man gebracht a Jahr nach dem in Midbar, amongst the differences between the Korban Pesach that they brought in Mitzrayim a year later in the desert, like welches wird erzählt in unser Parsha, which in our Parsha talks about it. The Pasuk says, Hashem said, "V'yasub bnei Yisrael es Pesach b'mei day ba'arba aser v'geimen." They should make the Korban Pesach in its time, which means on the 14th day of Nisan, which is Erev Pesach. So if we look at them, there are differences in how they were done. Amongst the differences are like this. Number one, Pesach Mitzrayim hat man gebracht b'mei Hashavua b'chel. In Mitzrayim, when they brought the Korban Pesach, it was the weekdays. How do we know that? In other words, it wasn't a Shabbos, it was a weekday. It says that they left Mitzrayim on Thursday. So the 14th of Nisan is always a day earlier in the week. The Shabbos was Wednesday. No, I'm sorry, what I said now is if they went out on Thursday, the day they went out, and this was the day before they went out, so it's Wednesdays. They went out on Thursday, so the Korban Pesach was on Wednesday, which is a weekday. Then Pesach Midbar hat man gebracht b'Shabbos. Pesach in the Midbar, and a year later, that was on Shabbos. How do we know that? The state in Seder Elam, it says in Seder Elam, as Rosh Chodesh Nisan v'yenem yor is given Rishon l'Maaseh Bereishis. Rosh Chodesh Nisan that year was Sunday. Nisan is given b'Shabbos, as the 14th day of Nisan was Shabbos. I was like confused before, but here we see that because we know that Rosh Chodesh was Sunday, so the 14th day was Shabbos. So the Midbar Korban Pesach was Shabbos. That's one difference. Another difference. By Pesach Mitzrayim is that Iker had Goshik event der Yochid. Pesach Mitzrayim, the main thing was as an individual thing, meaning der Yochid, every individual, which really means bias, every household had to, number one, all the things that you had to do with the Korban, they did it. See, not like other times, the Korban is, you bring the Korban, but the Kohanim do the Avedas. Here, every household which brought the Korban had to do the Avedas of the Korban. So it had to do with individual people, not with the tzibur. And the second thing, by Pesach Mitzrayim, it had to be in everyone's house. Like the Pasuk says, take the blood and put it on the two doorposts. So this one thing is that every Yochid had to bring, every household had to bring, and the Avedas had to be done in every house separately. Again, in the Pesach Midbar, alle Eden gedacht bringen the Mishkan. Pesach Midbar, the second year, all the Eden had to bring it to the Mishkan. But this is Mitzaref alle Karbonos from all Eden. So this combines them all, that there's one common denominator. They all were in the same place. The Lashon Hashas, like the Gemara uses the Lashon, she's also b'knufya, it comes in the gathering, meaning Basifas Chaverim Beregel Yonte, when everyone got together. That's what they brought the Korban. So they all brought it in the same place. And the fire vet is ongeruf na Korban Tzibur. And because of that, it's called a Korban Tzibur. We know there are two types of Korbanos amongst the Korbanos. That's a Korban Yochid, Korban Tzibur. Korban Yochid means a Korban that an individual had to bring. The person did an Aveda, he had to bring a Chatos, the other Aveda, so Osham, if you want to bring a Nedova, and Eder, he had to bring a Korban Shlom. These are all individual things. An individual person brought the Korban. Then you have the Korbanos Tzibur, the community Korbanos. Every day you bought the Korban Tomit. One in the morning, one in the afternoon. That was one Korban for everybody. So it made everyone into one. The Korban Musaf and Shabbos for Yom Tov, these are all Korbanos Tzibur. Korban Pesach is called a Korban Tzibur. Why is it called a Korban Tzibur? The MS, every individual had to be part of his Korban, or a few people together, part of their Korban. But nevertheless, because they all had to be brought in the Mishkan or in the Beis HaMikdash, it's called a Korban Tzibur. So here we have two things. Number one, that the Pesach Mitzrayim was done in a weekday, and that Pesach Mitzrayim was a yochid, was done as an individual thing, each household. The other Pesach was done not at yochid, it was done tzibur, which means that all were, and it was done on Shabbos. So it seems like, as the Rebbe will explain, that the two things go together, they're connected. I'm giving away what the Rebbe is going to say later, that a Korban Tzibur could be done on Shabbos, and if it's not a Korban Tzibur, it cannot be done on Shabbos. Which makes sense. If it's a community Korban, it's B'kuyev, then thing you can't bring in on Shabbos. And now the Rebbe says, as from them learn to know Lachem Matan Teire, wie die zwei Chilukim seine From here we learn now that even later on, the fact that it's a yochid is in the weekdays. The fact that it's a Korban Tzibur at Shabbos. Those was Korban Pesach is dangerous. This of the Korban Pesach pushes away. He says the Farvados is a Korban Tzibur. That's connected because it's a Korban Tzibur. But the Gemara Zok the Psocha, the Gemara actually tells the story like this. The Gemara says like this: Pa Machas Chol Yadal Li is b'Shabbos. Once Erev Pesach happened to be Shabbos. Shokchu, they forgot. V'leyodu in Pesach Deiches HaShabbos in Lav. They forgot what's the din. Is Korban Pesach push away Shabbos? Do you bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos? By the Aloha Zun Nisalmo for the Bnei B'Seira the Nisim. The Nisim, the leaders of the Eden, were the Bnei B'Seira, and they forgot what the din is. They forgot what is the din. Can you bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos or not? But Hillel gesagt, Hillel happened to come up from Bovel then to Yerushalayim. So he told him, if only one Korban Pesach a year that we're looking to see if it's Deicha Shabbos, we have more than 200 Korban Pesachs a year, and they're all Deicha Shabbos. What does that mean? How many Psochim? You have only one Korban Pesach. What he meant to say was mit Psochim meant the Karbonis Tzibur. When he said we have many Psochim, over 200 Psochim, means we have 200 Karbonis, which is similar to the Korban Pesach, and we know that they're Deicha Shabbos. Which are they? Korban Tomid and Musaf. Every day you bring a Korban Tomid, so 50 Shabbosim a year. So automatically that's 100, and you bring 2 a day. So it's already 100 Karbonis Tzibur. That is Deicha Shabbos. And then you have the Korban Musaf. So he said, so we see by these Karbonis, which are similar to the Korban Pesach. Why? Because this is also a Korban Tzibur. So for sure it's Deicha Shabbos. When the Gemara is Mamshech, and the Gemara Taka continues. As I learned to stop with Gzeira Shava Me'adeh. Me'adeh, how did you know Taka if I learned out from the Gzeira Shava that we have the words Me'adeh means on its time. And it means whatever the time is, even Shabbos. The Me'adeh steht by Korban Pesach. For Korban Pesach, it says you have to bring it Me'adeh in its proper time. By Korban Tomid, it says in its proper time. And we know the Korban Tomid you did every Shabbos, so same way as by Korban Tomid, by Korban Pesach also. So what he answered was that how did he know that the Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos? You could bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. So he answered because it's a Korban Tzibur. Just like all the other Korban Tzibur is Deicha Shabbos. Nachmer Furish is in Yerushalmi, but the Gir says, as Hillel gesagt in Yerushalmi, it's even clearer. There it says that what did Hillel say? He actually said it very clear. Hail the Tomid Korban Tzibur. Since the Korban Tomid is a Korban Tzibur, is a community Korban. Well, Pesach Korban Tzibur, and Pesach is also a Korban Tzibur. Ma Tomid Korban Tzibur Deicha Shabbos, a Pesach Deicha Shabbos. Just like the Korban Tomid, which is the Korban Tzibur, pushes away Shabbos, you bring it on Shabbos, so to come the Pesach. See, Gemara, even our Gemara, same shot. But there it says we have 200 Psochim a year. But there it says clearly, since this is a Korban Tzibur, that's why it's Deicha Shabbos. So here we see the connection that in the second year, and they brought the Korban Pesach, or the next year after they went out of Mitzrayim, it was more, you see the tzibur there, because in the first one there was no tzibur. Everyone in his own house had to do his own thing. Here it was a tzibur, they brought it to the Mishkan, but then in Shabbos, Deicha Shabbos. In the Mitzrayim, where it was not a Korban tzibur, the Taka wasn't a Shabbos, it wasn't the weekdays. Rebbe says, it's Kenkashanit from them was the Gemara Zok. You could say there's another reason. We're saying now that the reason why it's Deicha Shabbos is because it's a Korban tzibur, it's a Korban, considered a Korban. from the community, the Gemara gives a different reason why it's deicher. The Gemara says, you should accept this rule. Any korban that has a specific time when you have to bring it. Has to do because of the timing. They pass the time, so one says. That's a special time when you have to bring it to the Shabbos. It seems to contradict what is for that the reason for in Gemara. Or but later, das Tanakama, but according to the Tanakama, according to the first opinion over there in the Mishnah, is as not totally in the Tzibur. There, according to the other opinion, is because it's a korban tzibur. He says that korbanos hatzibur deiches haShabbos, the korbanos yochid eine deiches. Korban tzibur pushes away Shabbos. Korban yochid, the individual korban from a person, doesn't not take. For them, gufa was by the bnei Beseiru and Hillel, and since we see by the bnei Beseiru and Hillel, Yasha and Rabbi Yonasan, the Rebbe will bring that this is also machlekes between two tanoim. Rabbi Yasha and Rabbi Yonasan is given a shaklat betayit korban pesach is deiches Shabbos, since they had a discussion, an argument or a discussion whether it pushes away Shabbos, is muchach as a halten with the Tanakama. So obviously they hold like the Tanakama, not like Rabbi Meir. Because by later Meir, had they held like Rabbi Meir, that it depends on being a Zmani Kavua, this time has a special time. But later Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, what's the question? Korban Pesach is Zmani Kavua. Korban Pesach has to be brought at a specific time on that of Pesach. Since they had a discussion, so obviously they didn't look at it at the time. So to them, the main thing was whether it's a korban tzibur or not. So we see that if it's considered a korban tzibur, it's deiches Shabbos. If it's not considered, when it was not considered as korban tzibur, it was not deiches Shabbos. Now it doesn't mean that the time doesn't have anything to do. So far, it sounds like the main thing is that it's a korban tzibur. It has nothing to do with it's a time kavua. So it's not like that. It's not that zog. We have to say as the eichli that day from Tanakama muzayin for zmani kavua. But even according to the opinion like the Tanakama, that it's because it's the korban tzibur, not because of the time, but there also has to be a specific time when it's kavu established time. Outside dodi, it's a condition. That's not the reason why it's deiche. The reason why it's deiche is because it's korban tzibur. There is a condition. When does that work? Only if there is mani kavu. The time is a special time. That's a side reason. That's not the cause of why it's deiche Shabbos. But the far is up, and the Rabbi says the far is a parallel dobeshul tzibur nidei Shabbos. See, it's not only a korban tzibur. That's ikar. We have another type of korban tzibur which has no time. If the whole community, all the Yidden made a mistake, let's say the best and passed by mistake wrong, and everyone did the avera, so they have to bring a korban called par helam dobeshul tzibur, and that's a korban tzibur. That's for sure. It's a korban for the community, but it has no set time. So that does not deiches Shabbos. Agamas chatos akolo, even though it's a chatos, it's a korban chatos from the whole community. Un ein doch tzibur gadol miklal Yisrael. The greatest tzibur is a korban for Klal Yisrael. Nevertheless, you can't. Why? If we're saying that the whole reason when is the deiches Shabbos, if it's a korban tzibur, so why is not that deiches Shabbos? Because there is a condition. Condition is it has to have a time, specific time. This par helm dovish tzibur does not have a specific time. It's not deiches. But the bottom line, what the Rebbe is trying to say, okay, it has to have a zman. That's true, but that's not the reason. The reason why it's deiches Shabbos depends on it being a korban tzibur. Und river. Therefore, for Pesach Mitzrayim was given a korban yochid. A Pesach Mitzrayim, which was not a korban tzibur, it was not a community thing. Everyone in their own house, and everyone had their own korban. And it was a weekday, so we see the two together. It was a yochid, and it wasn't a Shabbos. And when that we take. Korban yochid, eine deiches Shabbos. If it's korban yochid, it's not deiches Shabbos. Any korban yochid is not deiches. Shenke Pesach Midbar is given by Shabbos. Pesach and the Midbar, the first year was on Shabbos. In them, Eifun is niker, as in them korban Pesach hat zuchukit on from Tzibur. It is because, you could see, that time when we brought the korban Pesach in the Midbar, that's when it became a Tzibur. And the Farkan is deiches in Shabbos, because then it was a Tzibur, there was a Mishkan, and you had to go, everyone had to go to the same place. So there we had this concept of the korban being a korban tzibur, and that's why it was on Shabbos to show us that the korban tzibur, the Pesach as a korban tzibur is deiches Shabbos.
Rabbi Schapiro.
Yes.
Your video is off. mean, we can hear you, but the camera is not on. Just to let you know.
It's not?
No, I mean, I cannot see you.
Now not. Now you could see me?
No, I cannot.
Anybody else?
I mean, now I can see you. Now,
You can see?
now, yes.
Yes, okay.
It's only a minute that you're gone. It's like 2 minutes.
Probably the Wi-Fi or whatever was not internet.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Go on.
Now, so we established that from then on, from the second one.
Again, you're off. Again, it's off.
Oh, someone's writing it. It says that my Wi-Fi
Because of the
is not
Wi-Fi.
so. Yeah. Try this. Maybe this will make it better. Is it better now?
And I cannot see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, so
We can hear you good.
Probably it'll go on and off. Okay. So now that it says it became a carbon sibur, and if it's a carbon sibur, that's why it's doich Shabbos. So the Rebbe continues, Hagamas Pesach Midbar V'Diras Hotem Geder from carbon sibur. Even though we just finished saying that the carbon Pesach, not the one from Mitzrayim, but from the Midbar one, and then later generations, all the carbon Pesach of all the years, is a carbon sibur. Is of a nitkan carbon sibur in all problem. It's not a carbon sibur in all details. Adarabah. The contrary, the Ikir Musa is a Korban Yochid. Basically, it's a Korban Yochid. It's an individual Korban. Jede Abura bringen a Besuch der Korban for Zeyer Moment. Every group has to bring a separate Korban. Like every other Korban Sibur is one Korban, like the Korban Tamid for ganz Klal Yisrael. Here, everybody has to bring his own. And he has to bring it for Zeyer Moment. The money, who pays for the Korban? Everyone has to pay his own money. Not like the Korban Yoch, the Korban Tamid, the other Korban, Korban Musaf. They borrowed it from the money from the Beis Hamikdash, not the Korban Pesach. She's do achilas bailim. The other Korban is from a tzibur. There's no person who eats from it to say that the owner of the Korban eats. There is no owner. The owner is the Klal Yisrael. But here, by the Korban Pesach, everyone eats. Noch when you go further, the Korban Pesach lebab chilas elachid. It says in Gemara that the Korban Pesach is a chila made for eating, and eating is by the individual people. But who could eat from it if you signed up for the korban? That shows all the individuality of the korban. Right? And other things also. But those sounds like the Kedorim and Inyonim from the korban yochid. So these are all things of a korban yochid that you eat from it and you pay for it and you bring it as your own korban. So it is a korban yochid. Nor as hot eichdem geder from a korban tzibur. It also has the concept of a korban tzibur. Mitzadem was also the knufia since it comes in a group. The spread geshocht and the gimel kitta you have to do it with groups. 3 groups have to bring it together. You can't bring it just as one person. And actually, there were 3 groups. The right calls. You have to have the call. The Gemara learns off in the post. It says call. That means it has to be a group. And the group means it's not an individual thing. It's connected to the group. So it means that it has both. It has the union of a korban yochid, and it also has the union of a korban sibur. Das heißt, as korban pesach is keilen sich gedorim seifen korban yochid, seifen korban sibur. Korban Pesach has Gedorim as concepts of Korban Yochid and Tzibur. And here, Leib goes even further. So sometimes you could say it has Inyonim that's connected to Yochid. 2 separate Inyonim, but it has both types of Inyonim. Here it's more than that. It is Kela nicht als Besunder Inyonim. Not that it has 2 separate Inyonim, something similar to a Yochid, something similar to a Tzibur. But as in the Gidrei HaYochid, not the Gidrei HaTzibur, in the thing that makes it into an individuality thing, you have it stored there. Then I will explain how. On the other hand, in the aspect of tzibur in it, you have it as a yochid. How is it? So that explains how it is. The Gizok, as I said before, is the Pesach Korban V'Meinish Al Yochid. Korban Pesach comes from individuals, each individual's money. It will make for eating at each individual eats. You have to be signed up individually, personally. Korban Tamid, you don't have to sign up. It's for everybody together. Here you have to sign up. Mela moves Mela, every time that you sign up, every group that signed up has to have a korban. But those alles this that you have to have your own korban has to be biknufia. Has to be in a group all eating zusammen. So what does it show? Even the way you did the individuality of the korban, which is that it's your own korban, that your own korban has to be brought in a group. That means the yochid has the concept of tzibur. It's the same on the other hand. Even though the Korban Pesach was brought in groups, What does groups mean? That it's a corporate, something like Sibur. He says, Gewen nicht in ein Kite. It wasn't one group, which means it's mainly a Sibur. Nor the Gimel is that the groups themselves had to be three groups. Which means, even when the Yidden were considered as a group, they still remained with divisions. What are the divisions? The Gimel Kittas Dafke had to be three groups. And also, each group had to have at least 30 people. That the Gemara says because there's a suffix how we learn the Gemara. But the bottom line is that the Yochid aspect has the Tzibur in it, and the Tzibur aspect, which is the group, also had to be divided to different groups. So this all shows this how the Korban Pesach is made up of Tzibur and Yochid, and because it's a Tzibur, that's why it's Deicha Shabbos. And in the Midbar, in the Mitzrayim, I mean, before that, it wasn't the Tzibur, it was not Deicha Shabbos. Based on this, we can explain the Shakel Vatari between the Bnei Seder and Hillel to Korban Pesach Deicha Shabbos and Mini. This will explain what was basically the discussion, Hillel and the Bnei Seder. Bnei Seder thought maybe you don't bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Hillel said yes. So they had a Shakel Vatari, had a discussion. What was it based on? What's the logic why it should or it shouldn't? Now we understand why. All does in Korban Pesach, I don't obey the Korban Seifin Yochid Seifin Tzibur. It says in Korban Pesach you have both inyonim, the inyon of Yochid and the inyon of Tzibur. So now you can discuss it. Which one is the most important one? Which one overweighs? The inyon of Yochid should be, is it the individuality of it? But then is the Deicha Shabbos. If the main thing it's a Korban Yochid is not Deicha Shabbos, doesn't touch Shabbat Shabbos. Or the inyon of Tzibur should be, but then after the Bekeach to Deicha Shabbos. Or maybe the other aspect of Tzibur is there. And that was the thing. So Hillel said, that's how the halacha is, that the Tzibur part of it overweighs, and since it's a Korban Tzibur, you can do it on Shabbos. And maybe the Seder thought, maybe it's a Yochid. The main thing is the Yochid, and it's not Deicha Shabbos. So that as Bora now, Rebbe is going to say, I'll prove another proof that this is the basis of the argument. You can find this from Sifri, from this that in Sifri, on this pasuk where it says in this week's parsha that Abraham said, let them make the Korban Pesach in its right time. That Gebrat Sifri brings as Eich Rabbi Yashe and Rabbi Yenis is einem chulik in them. Rabbi Yashe and Rabbi Yenis both argue in this thing. The Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos. The Korban Pesach is Shabbos. Yashe learned up from Meir that Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos. Yashe says yes, since it says B'Medi, which means in its time. So, like Hillel said, that from that we know you have to bring it in its time no matter what, even if it's Shabbos. Rabbi Yenis he says, no, that doesn't prove it. We can't stop learning from Meir that Korban Pesach is Deicha Shabbos. He said you can't learn out, and he holds it's not Deicha Shabbos. So we have they also argue. How is that a proof that this is the point of the machlekes is whether it's a Korban Tzibur mainly or a Korban Yochid? So the Rebbe says like this: Baal does a din nekuda hanal. Moses gave her a machriya the Yochid the prata that it's Tzibur. Since this idea, when you have a question of something that's individual, in it has two things: individual and group. Which one is stronger? Since that nekuda is in common, McCain is in the Kudas and Machlekes for Rabbi Yasher, Rabbi Yenis into the common. Rebbe says, I find many Machlekes in other aspects, in other sugyas, in the same two people, Rabbi Yasher and Rabbi Yenis. And the Rebbe says, I'll explain to you how all of those Machlekes are dependent on this Nekuda. They're all cases where you have an individuality together with a group, and which one is stronger. So since in so many Machlekes, and this is in the Nekuda, is Mistaber, makes sense. Probably this is also the reason for the argument by Korban Pesach with the Rabbi Yenis and the Rabbi Yashir, whether the Yochid is stronger or the Tzibur is stronger. And Mela probably has the machlekes between Hillel and Bnei B'Seira. And the Rebbe goes on in quite a few pages to bring 8 places in Shas where we have machlekes between Rabbi Yenis and Rabbi Yashir. And the basis of the machlekes is, in all these cases, there are 2 ways to look at those things. One is looking at the individual part of it, whatever that is the case over there, and the tzibur. And that proves that this is the sort of their machlekes. So mistamer, the same thing by Korban Pesach. The Rebbe said many times that if you find, sometimes we find in Svarim, by the Rebbe a lot, that he tried to explain how this and this machlekes is l'shitosis, same machlekes as these same people argue in different things. What's the mileage just to find this, to make it nice like that? No. The more places you find that this is the svara, proves to you that this is really the svara, because we see that in many places. The Rabbi here goes on to prove in different places, actually 8 places where we find a machlekes, and it's all based on, and explains how it's all based on this. Then the Rebbe also goes in to explain the srichas, that we call it. If they're all 8 places based on the same logic, so why do they have to argue in every place? Let them argue one of them and we'll understand others. And then it goes on that even though it's the same Nakuda, but each place has a certain things that's different, and he has to tell it all. But the bottom line is that from that we see that this is their machlekes in many places, we know this is the machlekes. So far what the Rebbe did was he explained what is the machlekes based on whether Korban Pesach is a brought on Shabbos. And the basis is, since the Korban Pesach is a Korban that has both, if it's a Korban Yochid, it's not Deicha Shabbos, as he said in the beginning, like the Pesach Mitzrayim was not Deicha Shabbos. If it's a Korban Tzibur, it is Deicha Shabbos. And the Shaila, what it is the Ikeh, since it has both. Now we're going to turn a few pages, page 112, at the bottom of page 112, and there we'll continue with the same Inyan, but we skipped all the Pshat Avatari in the Benis and the Rabbi Yashir. So the Rebbe says like this: Inyan Al in Korban Pesach. This is that we said by Korban Pesach, as it's Hod Gedorim for Yochid and Tzibur, has concepts of Yochid, individual Inyan of it, and its Tzibur, that we verstehen clearer, so it will understand that clearer. Leiten Hezber in them Geder Tzibur. After we explain what's the concept of a Tzibur, after we understand what a Tzibur is, then we can understand clearer what the Korban Pesach is, the Yochid and Tzibur, etc., etc. But when we have a concept of a Tzibur, of a community as a Tzibur, you could explain it in 2 ways. Number one way is es wird bottled the Metzias von Yechidim, and es wird a Metzias Chadosh Lagamra. That when you become a Tzibur, the individual loses his entity as an individual. It's a new Metzias, a new entity, a Metzias Achas von a Tzibur. One entity of a Tzibur. But they met to the Metzias from a Yochid. Just like a Yochid is an entity, each individual entity. Now you lose your individuality and now you all become one. It's not a pshat that it's a group of many. When you become a group of many, the many lose their Metzias. That's the concept of a Tzibur. Another way is, Tzibur maintains a Metzias Achas Lagamra. It doesn't mean completely that now there's a new entity of one entity. It's a combination of many individuals. Al derech together, like we find the idea of Berev Am Hadras Melech, it says, the more people you have, the nicer it's for the king. That's why it's good by a bris to have more people, by a mitzvah to have more people, because it's nicer for the Eibishter, for the king. But the Lashon is Berev Am Hadras Melech. When you have more people, it's the beauty of the king. What does that mean? Here doesn't mean that you become no more Yochid. But the Mechuven is not as they werden am Metzias Achas. Doesn't mean that they lose their individuality and they become one unit of a Tzibur. But on the contrary, here we want to have a lot of people. So we need the individuals to be. The more people you have, the more beauty is for the king, for the Eibishter. So here we're talking about a lot of individuals. So you can learn the Tzibur in 2 ways. One way Tzibur is that you lose your Metzias as a Yochid. And the other way is that you are Tzibur Taki, but you still keep the individuality, the entity of each individual separately. And it also becomes like all together into Metzias of a Tzibur. The second way is the concept of Tzibur that we have by the Korban Pesach. We said the Korban Pesach is Yochid and Tzibur in both. It's the second way. It's not a Korban Tzibur where the Klal Yisrael of Altei Metzias. It's not a Korban Tzibur that the Klal Yisrael becomes one. See, by the Korban Tomid, you could say that if you want to. The Rebbe will say later another detail in it. There's one Korban for everybody. So there's one entity of a Korban, one entity of Klal Yisrael. Here it's not like that. It's a Tzibur because all the Yidden have to bring the Korban. They bring it all in one place, but they're still bringing it as individuals. Or you say individuals are at least 3 groups, which means there is still differences. It's not completely a Tzibur. So this is the understanding of what does it mean that the Korban Pesach has Yochid and Tzibur. It's a Korban Tzibur, but not the regular Korban Tzibur where you could say you lose the individuality. Here, the Korban Tzibur is that you still keep the individuality. We could add here that what's the deeper reason? Why does the Korban Pesach Taka have these 2 inyanim, Yochid and Tzibur? It says like this. This is already Al Pichsidis. Pesach is the Mana Leib of Am Yisrael. Pesach is the time when the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish nation, was born. That's what it says in Yecheskel. He compares Yetzias Mitzrayim at a time, just like a woman gives birth. So this Pesach is a time when we were born, so to speak, as a nation. Since that's the beginning of Am Yisrael, and the Korban Pesach was at the time when the Am Yisrael was born, it contains the two inyanim, the two extremes that Am Yisrael has. What does Am Yisrael have? Am Yisrael has this. All Yidden seine Vereinigte name it sees from a tzibur. One thing is for sure, all Yidden are connected, combined as one entity of a tzibur, one complete unit of a tzibur. In other words, there is a concept by Yidden that all Yidden are one body, like one body, which has many parts to it. That's what all Yidden are. On the other hand, jeder Yid for sich is an Elam Olam. It says every Yid is a full world, what it says. If you save the life of a Yid, you save the whole world. Every Yid is a complete world. So is by Yidden the concept of being a tzibur, or is it being every individual Yid? It's both. That meat is moving from that. We understand from what the Rinyan from tzibur in Korban Pesach, and that's why the Korban Pesach at the time of the birth of Klal Yisrael had both in Yonim. Now the Rebbe adds. Now we'll understand why the union of tzibur in Korban Pesach and Pesach Midbar. When did they really start? The Pesach of the Midbar. Hagamas latest Am Yisrael given the Yitzios in Mitzrayim. Even though the Yidden were born, the nation was born when they went out of Mitzrayim. But he said Pesach Mitzrayim was not really tzibur. It started later, a year later. Why? By Yidden hat sich die Achone zum Metzias von tzibur. When did the Yidden Taki become a tzibur? After what happened to them was by Matan Torah. It happened by Matan Torah when they seien zugekommen zu Vayichon Sham Yisrael neged the Hor Kishech. It says he rested, the Yidden rested by the mountain. And Rashi says, what does it mean? He rested. They rested, I should have said. Because they were all like one. When did that happen? Before Matan Torah, right? By Matan Torah. So in Mitzrayim, it didn't happen yet. So in Mitzrayim, the Yidden were not yet a tzibur. By Matan Torah, they became a tzibur. So only after Matan Torah, the Korban Pesach could be considered a Korban of a tzibur. And the reason is so because the Yidden are a tzibur now, so now you can make the Korban Pesach. For that's why in Mitzrayim given the Rinyan Makarabas Pesach. But if the Korban Pesach mainly is because of the Yidden who became a tzibur, so why did they bring a Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim? Noch mehr. Besides that, the fact that they brought a Korban Pesach, kama alochas from Pesach Davis werden abgelernt und abgegeben them was steht by Pesach Mitzrayim. Many alochas that we learn out for the all Pesach, all Korban Pesach for the later years, is learned out from what the Torah says by Korban Pesach Mitzrayim. Das heißt, as Pesach Mitzrayim is the Reish Yisod from the Shpete Diketzochim. Pesach Mitzrayim is the foundation and the beginning of all later Korban Pesach. Why? While das was Am Yisrael the Shpete based Matan Torah geworden am Metzias von Tzibur, because this that the Yidden later on, after Yitzias time, by Matan Torah became a Tzibur. He says, na Eifen was the Metzias und Chshibes von Yochid, was his Mutgische Pesach Mitzrayim Kanal, but durch dem nicht bottle, nor bleibt euch noch dem als Metzias. If the Me'in of a Tzibur would mean that there's no more Yochid, so the way the Korban Pesach was in Mitzrayim was a Yochid, has nothing to do with the Korban Pesach later. Later it's a Tzibur. But since we said before that Pesach Mitzrayim, even though it's a Tzibur, it's not a real Tzibur, that there's no concept of the Yochid. The individual gets lost. We said the Pesach, by the Korban Pesach, it's a Korban Tzibur, but the Yochid is still there. That's why I had to start from Pesach Mitzrayim. Pesach Mitzrayim was really the Yochid. And that's also important for the later Korban Pesach, because later Korban Pesach remained the Korban Yochid. They have the Yochid in it. But that Yochid became in a form of a Tzibur. The whole Tzibur is made up of the Yochid. Then he says, by the way, we said Pesach Mitzrayim wasn't really Tzibur, but to another degree, a little bit it had, a miniature way it had of being a Tzibur. Yes, it says in Medrash, as Kol Yisrael, all the Eden made from one Korban Pesach. It says that David, when Moshe brought the Korban Pesach, the smell went throughout all Mitzrayim, and all the Eden came running, they want to eat it. It smelled so good. Moshe told them that you can't because you didn't mal yourself, so they mauled themselves and they ate from the Korban Pesach. That's a Medrash. How it fits to the regular shot, rather going into that. So we see there is a concept of Tzibur, that they all ate from one Korban Pesach from Moshe. So they even had some kind of concept of tzibur. Why? For Bibal, Pesach Mitzrayim is the Yisod from Pesach Day. That's in Pesach Mitzrayim is the foundation of the later Korban Pesach. And the later Korban Pesach with tzibur, in Ima, Kaponim in them Korban for Nosi Ador, I'm aim for Ninyan tzibur. So at least the Korban Pesach Mitzrayim had to be, at least from Moshe Rabbeinu, the Nosi had to be some kind of tzibur. So mainly Pesach Mitzrayim is not Tzibur. Later on it is Tzibur. That's why it's Deicha Shabbos. Pesach Mitzrayim was not Deicha. But the way it's the Tzibur, it's like the most important part of the Korban, but there's a Yochid there. The Tzibur did not take away the Yochid. So by Pesach, later on, you felt there was the Yochid and the Tzibur were both there clearly. But the Pesach Mitzrayim, mainly it was Yochid, yeah, there was something in of the Tzibur, etc., etc. This idea that we said that by the Korban Pesach, the Yidden became a Tzibur, but the Tzibur and the Yochid still remained an entity of a Yochid. We find it really is found also a little bit. It's reflected also in a regular Korban Tzibur. Now, by a regular Korban Tzibur, you would say, when you brought one Korban Tamid, so by a regular Korban Tzibur, it's definitely one. There's no Yochid there. So it would seem only by Korban Pesach, the Tzibur was connected to the Yochid. By a regular Korban Tzibur, the Yochid is out. There's no Yochid there. It's one Korban for everybody. The Rebbe says no. Even by a regular Korban Tzibur, we also find something a little bit like it. Where do we see it? Even the regular Korban Tzibur comes for the money of the community. It's not individual. And if a person donates to the fund of the Beis Hamikdash, the Gemara says he has to, in his mind, make up, he's giving it up. He's losing his own mitzias. He's giving it up to the tzibur. It's not the money of an individual anymore. That's the truth. For deswegen still, nevertheless, there's still the individual part that he has in the korban of the yochid in the korban tamid, which is a real korban tzibur. Where do we see that? Who says? Maybe you lose yourself, you're no more yochid and you only tzibur. The Chazal zog and the Chazal say up in posting by Kerech v'Adosei, by Kerech it says al tefin u'mechosam. Meish Rabbeinu said to the Eibishter, don't turn to their korban. What does Meish Rabbeinu mean when he has the Eibishter Kerech and his people? Don't turn to their korban. So Rasha says it means I know that each person has a share in the korban tzibur, in the korban tamid. So I'm asking you, he said to the Eibishter, their share tomorrow morning when they bring the korban, their share should not be burned. What do you mean their share should not be burned? They have no more share. It's a korban tzibur. So what do we see from here? That even by a korban tzibur, there is something connected to the yochid. Nochmari, going further, we find that even by a tzibur and yochid is part of the tzibur, we see a din, an interesting din. The din is, as I feel in a yochid from the tzibur, when we weigh an individual versus the tzibur, is man nit mavater of a yochid with the tzibur. You can't overlook the individual because of the benefit of the tzibur. An interesting din. The psak for Ram and Ram Paskans, im omru lehem akum, nulon echad mikem nargenu. If there's a group of Yidden and the goyim say, give us one Yid and we'll kill him. Ve'im lav, if you don't give me that one Yid, narik kulchem, we'll kill you all. So logically we'd say, let them give one, because otherwise they're going to die. Let them all get killed. You're not allowed to give a Yid, any Yid, to the goyim to be killed. That's haste, which means agamas tzibur is machriya say yochid, even though normally the tzibur overweighs the yochid. It doesn't mean that when you have a tzibur, the yochid doesn't count, and you only have to care for the tzibur. If that would be the case, then you say, yeah, we have to save the tzibur. It means to give up one. Shows that even when we're dealing with the tzibur, the yochid takes place. The yochid is important. You can't overlook it. So here we see that when you have a tzibur, and the tzibur is a new entity of a tzibur, all the Yidden together make up one unit. The individual still remains. And that we find by the Korban Pesach, especially, even more than by other things, the Korban Pesach, that they talk about this week's Parsha in the Midbar. That's where started the Korban Pesach being a Korban Tzibur, and at the same time, it had the union of Korban Yochid, because the Yochid was not in his battle. Punkt vidas is Benegeya to Tzibur Klolas Am Yisrael. Now the Rebbe continues. Just like this is Benegeya to Tzibur, which is the general of all the Yidden together, as Zeich Benegeya dem Yochid. So same thing when it comes to an individual. Every individual has to have these two feelings. It has to go with these two concepts. Hillel says in Pirkei Avos, Im eina nili mili. The way it says that Im eina nili mili kesheni latzmi moani, and then he says Im leach shavei masai. The literal translation is, if it's not me, who am I? Who's going to be for? Not who am I? Sorry. If eina ni, if If I'm not going to care for myself, mili, who's going to care for me? So I have to care for myself. Then he says, but on the other hand, keshani la'atzmi, for myself, what am I? Myself, I'm really nothing. And then he continues, and if not now, you always have to remember, if not now, don't push anything off. If not now, when will you do it? So the Rebbe says like this. The first two statements mean like this. Imein anili mili means, if not me, as me, anili, I have to be me. Und zusammen damit ist Teil von Klal Yisrael. At the same time, you're part of Klal Yisrael. Und neben nicht hat gar nicht. If I'm not part of the Klal, I have nothing. Keshani la'atzmi mo ani. If I'm myself, I'm nothing. That means we have to think of yourself, that you have the, as a yochid, you have the responsibility, whatever you have to do. At the same time, you have to know that you're part of the Klal, part of the Tzibur. So that's interesting how not only also when we look as a korban or things like that, everyone in himself has to look at them two ways, because by Yidden we have these two things. Each Yid as an individual is connected to the Eibishter, Mechuyev b'mitzvahs, etc., and each Yid is part of the Tzibur at Klal Yisrael. Now the Rebbe adds an interesting word. Now that we said that these two things, these two ideas, we find in the Korban Pesach. So the Rebbe said I could explain Pshat and Hillel's words more in a remez, in a hint, and also the word tzachos. Tzachos means when it's like a good chap, but it's not a simple pshat. It's not really pshat, but it's a sharp pshat. The word tzachos really means like a joke, but chas v'shalom is not a joke. It's just something that you can't say is some simple pshat. But the Geilah Pesach, we pshat in this word that Hillel said, that we just said, that if I have to be for myself, and I also have to remember on myself I'm nothing, has to do with Pesach. How? Bahagdi. He said, I'm going to say that Rebbe says. You can't say that in time of Hillel, there was a meaning to learn Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos. But since the Torah is eternal, meaning is meaning is also eternal. It means it's really true. We have to say, der Maimer from Hillel, was is in Perek Rishon of Masechet Avos, what Hillel said in the first Perek of Pirkei Avos, which you say the first Shabbos after Pesach, Shabbos Pesach has a connection to the Shabbos after Pesach. How is it? Rabbi never explains it. Interesting. The Rebbe, I mentioned in the beginning of the Sikha that Hillel gepasken as Pesach is the Shabbos, right? We said before Hillel was the one that pasken Pesach pushes away Shabbos, Korban Pesach, and therefore you could bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. And we said before, what's the reason behind Hillel? He does mitzadem, but Pesach had them get it from Korban Tzibur, because Pesach is the Korban Tzibur, and Korban Tzibur is Deicha Shabbos. That's why that Hillel pasken that you bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. And the Gemara is that Messiah. The Gemara finishes off. Adosan gebracht, that's that Maman given Hillel als Nosi. When they saw how smart Hillel is, how great he is, this psak din that he said that it's Deicha Shabbos is the reason they made him into a Nosi. So the Rebbe says it fits to this thing. Lernt me gleich noch Pesach. So right after Pesach we learn. It means noch in this manner when for Hillel als Nosi. They made him a Nosi when? Pesach time when he said this. So right after Pesach we learn Maimer v'teiras v'hiroas Hillel was his bekeshet to Korban Pesach. So we're learning what Hillel said concerning Korban Pesach. Because Pesach he became the Nosi because of what he said to the Korban Pesach. That's what he means. He became a Nosi because, and that's the pshat in these words. How is it the pshat? So everybody says like this. Im eina nili mili. Which means, as we said before, eina nili. If I'm not for myself, who am I? Which means I have to care about the yochid. The mahus from Korban Pesach is a Korban yochid. He was saying it beremes to the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach is something that is individual. Darfas allein bring it. From the moment you bring it yourself, from your own individual money, or the mnuyav gezählt one of them, you have to get signed up for it, etc., etc. The yochid. That's the first part. That the Korban Pesach is anili. It's for me. I am a yochid. Liiduch aber. On the other hand, keshani la'atzmi mo'ani. For myself, if I'm myself, only myself, what am I? Muss haben them get it from Korban Tzibur. The Gabbat the Pesach is not enough, even though the Korban Pesach is a yochid, but it has the concept of Tzibur also. Eibes will give him blaze adinya for yochid, and that's what he said, keshani la'atzmi, if I be only myself, which means that the Korban Pesach would only be yochid, but the Zidei even Shabbos. It wouldn't push away Shabbos. And if it wouldn't push away Shabbos, what would happen? Hillel would never become Nosi. Hillel became a Nosi because it's Tzibur, and that's why he's able to pass. And that's what he says. Keshani la'atzmi, if it would be only the Yochid part of the Korban, Mo'ani. What am I? I wouldn't have the position. So that's an advertisement with Derech Hatzachos. that if Korban Pesach wouldn't be a Korban Tzibur, I wouldn't. So therefore, first thing he says it's a yochid. If ein anili mili, it has to be anili yochid. But on the other hand, it's a tzibur also, and if it wouldn't be a tzibur, I wouldn't have the position. Who am I? Kemen fragen, but then you could ask, I feel like the Korban Pesach is initial tzibur, even though the Korban Pesach is tzibur, muss es doch haben the knife and kavuas money. Didn't we say in the beginning that there's a condition? Besides, the reason why it's Deicha Shabbos is because it's a Korban tzibur. But it has to have also a set time. If it's a Korban tzibur which doesn't have a set time, it's not Deicha Shabbos. So it needs a kavuas money. You have to kenna Deicha Zayin Shabbos, can also base. So it's not enough that it's tzibur. So that's why Zogt Hillel. So Hillel adds on. If not now, when will it be? In other words, there has to be in a set time. Korban Pesach is kavuas money. If you dalet nissen, the Korban Pesach has a set time. So now let's read the Mishnah. Hillel says like this: Imeina nili. If I'm not for myself, who am I? Which means I have to be for myself. There's a yochid here. Kishanil asked me on the other hand, if I'd be only myself and no tzibur money, I wouldn't get the position because I wouldn't. Sagdin I said would be wrong. And then he continues these words. But on the other hand, the reason why it's Deicha Shabbos is because it has a time. Set time. That's like if not now, can't do it some other time. But maybe that's why it's Deicha. So now that at Kishem vs is Bayedin Bazich, just like we said, everyone on himself has to look at himself as his responsibility and his responsibility of as a yochid and then also of a tzibur. The same thing as Eizveich b'negeya l'reyacha, regarding your relationship to somebody else, which is v'hafta l'reyacha kamecha. What is that? It says you do adinyan from Ahavas Yisrael to welchem yidin is on nor zayin. The fact that you have to have Ahavas Yisrael to any yid, whoever he is mitzadem v'kol Yisrael ish echad chaverim. Really, it's why? Because we're all one. Baaloscho, all one. Saposik, all the yidin are one. The Alter Rebbe is masbid. The Alter Rebbe says it in Yeros HaKedesh, as all Yidden seien wie ich echad mechube meiber im Rabbi. That all the Yidden are like one body that has many limbs. So all the limbs are really one body. So that's why you have to care about somebody else. There's a different explanation of what this means. Number one is, there is a tale for Klal Yisrael. Every is part of the Klal Yisrael. Maimer Chazal, like the Chazal say, the Medrash says, if by one yid would have been missing, the Shechina wouldn't be revealed. So we see every individual counts as an individual. Another expression, called Tainus Shem Pesha Yisrael Ein Tainus. Any fast day that you don't can also include Pesha Yisrael, the bad yidin, or Pesha Yisrael, is not called a Tainus. So what is the reason? But those is not because we need what that individual represents as a yochid. But those is einer from the klal. Since every yid is part of the klal, so the klal is not complete if not every yid is there. But it's not because we need his individuality. It's all part of the klal, and every yid is part of the klal, but not because who he is as individual, but he's part of the klal. So you need every yid. That's one thing. Another shot. Every yid has individual mile, but the mile is mashli in the klal. Before we're saying it's because it's part of the klal. Now we're saying even more. The mile that every person has is important for the klal. Makes the klal complete. With the Alter Rebbe is masvir, like the Alter Rebbe explains, as a sisfarana mile irregular mrosh. Every part of the body has a mile, and you need it. The foot is much lower than the head, but the foot has a mile. The foot could take you where the head can't take you. The head wants to go, and the foot to take you. What's mitzader mile is the regel b'chinas rosh. As far as that mile is, the foot is like the head. It's the head in that aspect. So here it's something already. We're talking about the individuality of each individual. Here we're talking about that we feel the individual mile of every individual. Not because we need that individuality. Each, in order to have the klal complete, so the first way was to be part of the klal, you have to have everyone. Now we say not only you have to have everyone, you have to have everyone with his milas. But still, why do you need it? Because the klal is not complete without those milas. Like the body is not complete, you want the foot to take you away. But on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe is mavayim in Ahavas Yisrael, but when the Alter Rebbe in Tanya Perik Lamed Beis is masber Ahavas Yisrael, He says, it's not enough. It's not sufficient. Not enough. Suffice when he says that all are the same. All Yidden Neshamas are the same. There's one Father for all of us. Why are we all called brothers? Just like two brothers have the same father, we all have the same father. Which means, so he says more than that. He says, at his Magdin, he starts off by saying, when it comes to the neshama, who knows the greatness and the mile of each neshama in that shirish? Which means, the shirish by the Eibishter. But I have to love a Yid not only because he's part of the cloud, and his mile helps the cloud. Portion him as an individual, his own miles. Not only because he's part of the cloud, like the first way, or he adds to the completion to make the cloud complete. That's the third way, as an individual. And even when you love a Yid, Poshet mitzad his own mitzvah is who he is as an individual, and that has to be kamecha. You have to love him like you love yourself. Al derech everin from ein guf. Just like you have limbs of the same body. Everyone is a separate limb. Not only it is, it has to be that way. If each limb would not do its own job, it wouldn't work. They're still all from one goof. And the far, and therefore, them ort was herzib blaze that in not protiv in the maver. Therefore, not only you look at each limb as part of the body and it's needed for the whole body, even when you look at each limb at its own job as an individual that this limb does. Not he completes the whole body. Even when you look at him as an individual, he's connected to the rest of the body. Once that Avos Yisrael should be to every single Yid equally as an individual person. And that makes him part of the klal, not only because he's mashlim the klal, because the klal has all these individuals, and each individual we have to have. When we have get involved in After from one Yid to another, in the way we said before, where the Eibishter, it says that the Eibishter is also called our friend, but the Eibishter, the Eibishter will also show his love to the Eden. The Gael Zain from Golas, in the find him and take us out of Golas, and in the same two ways. Which two ways? As part of the Klal and as a Yochid. Which two ways? Number one, the Pasuk says, everyone, one by one, the Yid will be collected by the Eibishter to the Gul. Yeder Yochid Bezunder, everyone individual. The Rasha says, Pasha Nitzovim, the Eibishter is Eiches B'Yod of Mamesh, the Eibishter will hold everyone by his hand, to fear Yeder Bezunder from Golas. Will take out every individual Yid from Golas. So that's one thing. And also to take out the Eibishter from Golas. The Eibishter will himself go out from captivity. When they go out, the Shechina will be them, Rasha says. So the Eibishter takes every individual out as an individual, and he himself too. And the second thing, and then they'll also be out as a group, as a call. Like it says, a big call, a big community, a big tzibur will come back to Eretz Yisrael. And as I said, the rest of the Sikha, the whole middle part, which is the different machlekes and Tergenis and Yashia, which is based on the concept whether we look more at the Yochid or the Tzibur, everyone should learn themselves. Okay.